Check Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, coming to you from Studio 8H here at the Check News World Headquarters in Victoria. The BC budget dropped this week. Premier David Eby's first budget. Tons of money flying out all over the place, and our panel is going to break it down in areas of the renter's rebate and housing and political implications. All sorts of interesting angles. The pod squad is here. Jeff, Jillian, and Allie. As always, thank you for being here and walking us through this because there's a lot to talk about in the budget. Let's start with just sort of general impressions here of the budget. It's an $80 billion spending plan. We are swinging as a province from a $7 billion surplus to a $4.2 billion deficit with tons and tons of money flying in every direction. How do we think that it landed? Jeff, why don't we start with you?
Sure. It's the budget British Columbians wanted, and it's the budget David Eby delivered. It's like British Columbians went to the David Eby coffee shop, ordered a delicious black coffee. That's the coffee we should all enjoy. And barista Dave served up what folks asked for, and in most cases, even got their name right. Look at significant public investment on the issues we've been talking about on this show for months, right? It's where people want action and progress on healthcare, $6.4 billion, on mental health, $1 billion, on public safety, $426 million for more police officers, on housing, $4.7 billion, and more details to come, and on affordability, renter's rebate, free contraception, 10% top up to family benefit. So it's the budget folks wanted. Now the issue for government becomes delivering over a short time span, and that will be the big challenge for David Eby in the months before the election.
Yeah, it does hit all the areas, and there is a lot of money there, Allie. What do you make of this?
Well, this is very interesting. So a few weeks ago, after the throne speech, we as a team had our predictions for what the budget was going to be like. And I think the consensus was that it wasn't going to be a balanced budget. It indeed is not a balanced budget. I have continuously said, though, that I think right now Canadians aren't overly concerned with balanced budget at a time where life is increasingly unaffordable and we need a little bit of help from government. But that's not sustainable. I think right now we're asking for a lot of credit and no plan to pay it off. But the NDP get credit where credit is due because they've created over 11,000 new government workers. This is an increase of about 33%. With the natural resource revenue projected to drop by 33%, the NDP's decision to slow down LNG and forestry, I've said this over and over and over again. The budget also announced that they'll hire 160 new staff to reduce natural resource permit backlogs and, quote, unlock economic potential. This is my favorite line here because if they wanted to unlock economic potential, they would say yes to those high-paying, good jobs in our natural resource sector. But instead, we're getting lots of government workers.
Some of those workers, I think, we kicked this topic around in the past, are the public sector coming back in, healthcare workers who were privatized coming back in. But there has been an increase for sure. And this budget does paint a very dismal forecast for the natural resource sector. Forestry is dropping by half in terms of revenue from all sorts of different problems, and even the old growth file here. You're right, it is not a good picture on that revenue side, but there's a lot of money being spent just in general. Jillian, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are like first just on the sort of financial picture. I think we're in very unusual times where everybody was predicting a massive economic slowdown because of COVID. So government spent a lot to sort of shore up the economy. And I think like a bigger boost than was expected happened, which is why we ended up with the surpluses. And now that's sort of catching up with us now that all of these programs are sort of expiring. So I think that, the difference between the surplus and the deficit now needs to be viewed in that context. I think, it was interesting just in terms of, a big test of what is David Eby's leadership brand going to kind of look like? And I think this budget is a lot more of a continuation of the Horgan legacy. I don't know, if John Horgan was still premier, if we'd be looking at a budget that's would be significantly different. They're spending more, but I think that's a response to sort of where issue approval ratings are at. People are obviously not happy about the way things are going on key files. So I thought that it was interesting from that perspective. There's nothing in here that's sort of like a signature initiative or anything big. On the other hand, Eby didn't have a ton of time to influence it because the budget was already in motion before he became leader. But it was a thing that I was watching for to see sort of which way it was going to land. I think, on the affordability front, I think that one was another really interesting thing to watch. That's, top of mind for most people as their kind of top issue. And what we got were a lot of tax credits, which I don't know are going to really do a lot to address cost of living, no matter where you are sort of on the income spectrum. And then, if you're on the low income spectrum, we got a little bit of increases in shelter and disability rates, but nothing to bring those above the poverty line. So, I think we're spending a lot of money, but I'm not sure if we're going to see, a year from now that people are going to say things are really different because of all of the spending.
Mm-hmm. No Eby bucks. I thought maybe there'd be some cashola rolling out in the form of checks, but you're right. A lot of income tax credits, which are good, I think, for economists and bureaucrats. They love to administer things that way. For politicians, I'm sure in some ways they prefer to send out cash because people actually get it, which brings us to the renter's rebate. A 2017 promise by the NDP government for $400 cash in your pocket to help with renting, to kind of compensate for the fact that the homeowner's grant goes to people who own homes. We have finally seen the renter's rebate 6 years later. It is an income-tested income tax credit. So most people aren't going to get this, but if you have a household income of under $60,000, you could qualify for this. If it declines in value to $80,000, where you're cut off completely. I'm not sure this was the renter's rebate that John Horgan originally envisaged. That policy was difficult for the NDP to execute. Clearly, it has been stalled up for many years, but now it's here. Mission accomplished banner is unfurled. Jillian, let's stay with you. Is that enough? Is that the renter's rebate that people wanted? And then also just to expand into housing in general. There's a lot of money on housing in this budget, but a lot of questions about how quickly units can be built and some revising of the projections and that type of thing.
Yeah, well, on the renter's rebate, I think that this is certainly, like you said, more sort of sensible policy rather than just cutting checks, because that can be inflationary and just kind of drive up costs. But I think that it will be disappointing to a lot of people that thought that they were getting a check back in 2017. People have pointed out that the average rent in Metro Vancouver has gone up by more than $400 since the NDP first made this promise. So, I think it's one of those things where it's more of a defensive move, if anything, that the government can say when they go to the polls, we delivered on this technically, but I don't, I think it's not exactly what people were envisioning. I think, John Horgan specifically said checks in the past, and that's not what we're getting. And it's also income tested, so not everybody gets it. I think, the rental issue more broadly is a really tough quandary. I think, the government's working on more measures that could have more impact. Like, ultimately what we need is more supply of affordable rentals. The housing minister has said that, they're looking at things like making it easier to build secondary suites. That's going to be really interesting to see whether that comes in the form of just streamlining approvals and sort of, removing red tape, or if it's actually going to provide incentives or support to actually getting those built. Because, the problem that you run into with any policy that goes at increasing housing supply is that it drives up the cost of actually getting that supply built. And I think that's the issue that the government keeps running into with housing, and why they've also had to revise those numbers. Originally, they had planned in 2017 to build 114,000 units of affordable housing, but during the last 5 years, the cost of doing that has gone up and up and up, and there's massive constraints on even just getting construction going. So We have so many things that we want to build in this province, from housing to, clean energy projects. But incentivizing that is inflationary and drives up costs of doing so. So it's a very, very complex issue.
They're great points, and they're fascinating points, because in the budget there is that talk of a financial incentive program for owners to create secondary suites, which immediately raises the question of, are you just helping owners create property value increases by renovating and adding suites, but it adds stock, which could lower rent, maybe? The issue kind of ends up full circle in a lot of different ways. Allie, what do you make of renter's rebate, the budget, and kind of the housing file here?
Yeah, so for those who are doing the mathing, I mean, Jillian is right. The NDP promised 114,000 affordable homes. The Ministry of Housing is only planning to complete 3,000 of that. So those numbers just aren't adding up. But let's talk about this $400 yearly tax credit. $400? I was reminded this week that you need to make $100,000 as a single person to afford a one-bedroom apartment in Vancouver. And so $400 doesn't really go a whole lot of a way. And then the tax credit doesn't apply to people who are still living with their parents or family members. And so, I'm in my early 30s, and I have a lot of people in my network who are still living at home, maybe renting out a basement suite, maybe renting out a laneway home. So this isn't helping them at all. So it's a tax credit, but it's not a tax credit for everyone. And I think that's an important distinction to make here.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, let's bring you in.
Oh, I'm looking forward to the opposition parties campaigning against. I heard Allie talk about all the public sector workers that were being hired by the government. So I'll look forward to the campaign against hiring more doctors, nurses, long-term care workers, personal care workers, teachers, special ed assistants, and all that. That will be a fun debate to watch. And similarly, I'm hearing the comments and the criticisms of the renter's rebate, which I think is a tax credit, is way stronger public policy than what was actually initially promised by John Horgan, which I've described on this show as a dumb policy, because it wasn't targeted and it wasn't focused on the people who needed the help the most. I will look forward to the opposition campaigning against the $400 for renters. It is a challenging time for renters. $400 is going to be of some help, and it's $400 more than either of the other parties promised during the last election or are promising now. I take the points, and they're good points, about the broader issues around housing and the need to bring on more supply. And, that was the one area in the budget that had a big number, but not many details. It was $4.7 billion for housing, but a lot of details that need to be fleshed out by government on its refreshed housing plan. And that's to happen in the spring. And I'll await passing too harsh a judgment on government until I've had a chance to see what's in that plan. Should be coming soon.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting. We have a new housing plan by a premier who was the housing minister to sort of help execute the last plan for part of it anyways. But we're all waiting for that plan, because I think there'll be a lot more in it than we've seen so far on some of the other announcements. Let's move on to the addictions plan. So there's $1 billion over 3 years in this budget. Unfortunately for the government, that sort of leaked out in advance, thanks to a dogged and ruggedly handsome journalist who will go unnamed. But this addictions plan is, I would say, and I'm just being generous here, as the host, I get to go first on this one. I'd say it's 2/3 of really maybe what the NDP probably should have done here. I find it fascinating because it talks about a number of beds, 190 beds over 3 years. We have no idea if that's the right number of beds. It's some random number. We don't even track the beds. It is demonstrably a lesser plan than the BC Liberal plan in several areas, including the fees on the beds, which the NDP are not eliminating for some inexplicable reason. And this thing was rushed through Treasury Board a few weeks ago, but it doesn't match the Liberal plan. And I'm interested in all of your thoughts on the NDP ceding, inexplicably to me, the addictions treatment issue to the Liberals to leave them in a position where they look like the more compassionate addictions treatment party? I'm not sure I totally understand that. And record money, just too late, I think, for the NDP politically to look like they're leading on this issue. They look like they delivered a plan that is less than their opponents for some reason that they can't say in a budget where they had unlimited fiscal room to spend. Allie, what do you think?
Yeah, certainly the NDP essentially copy and pasted the Kevin Falcon plan that was announced a few weeks ago on mental health and addictions, but left out the best parts. Left out the best part where it would be accessible to people at no cost. So I'm genuinely confused. You're already spending a ton of money. You're already doing these record investments. Why leave out one of the most compassionate parts of that plan that was shared by the BC Liberals of making this accessible? Seriously confused.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, what do you think? What's going on here?
I saw that the Canadian Mental Health Association said that it had never seen the words mental health and $1 billion together in the same sentence from a government before. And so this is the most significant investment that a BC provincial government of any political stripe has made in mental health and addiction treatment. It was $586 million for treatment. And comparing it to the Liberal plan, we've discussed who came up with it first, and that's neither here nor there. It doesn't really matter. But I will say that in terms of the detailed costing of opposition plan, it's like fantasy sports general managers, numbers and moves that make good financial sense in imaginary made-up worlds don't make a whole lot of sense when they're exposed to the rigors of reality, which is the exact reason why during elections which is the exact reason why during elections the public service does independent costings of party platform, and partisan estimates are always lower than reality. So this is a significant investment. I think that we've talked on this show before about how I think that anything government will invest is not going to be enough to meet the demand. But I wouldn't say that the Liberal plan would do any better than what the NDP is proposing here.
Okay, Jillian, what do you think? I mean, I feel like the road to opposition is paved by parties that say they're doing record funding in areas, but, don't deliver what people want. Every year we get record education funding because we added in $100 million, record whatever funding, healthcare funding, but the results, the sort of impact seems to be where that is measured. What do you make of this plan versus the other plan and where we are?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's not the funding, it's the outcomes. And right now we have no way to measure that. We don't know how long wait lists are. We don't know how successful people's recoveries are coming out of these programs. And that's a huge problem. We've had many reports going back many years from government experts pointing out how this is really needed in order to sort of start measuring success, and also to implement standards of care, which right now we have no provincial standards of care. And I think, when we start talking about putting billions of dollars, public money, into these programs that are right now run by the private sector, and there's a huge diversity of organizations calling themselves treatment centers out there that all have different approaches. And, it's good to have a diversity of approaches. There isn't one size fits all when it comes to treating addiction. But I think that we need to really move towards having those standards of care. And to do that, we need to have the data to see what's working and what's not to back it up. So I think that's really critical. I haven't seen anything from the government indicating that they're moving on it. They kind of made some vague promises when the Greens asked about it in the House this week. They leaned back on saying that they have already regulated recovery homes, but last year the chief coroner said that veterinary care is better regulated than addictions care in BC. So I think that's the first thing that government really needs to get a handle on if we're talking about $1 billion going out the door on this front. And then I think, past that, we need to get out of this cycle where we're just throwing money at treating crises. We need to start talking about prevention. And there's very little in this budget to address that. And I think that's another huge aspect of the mental health and addictions file where the government is ceding ground, in this case to the Greens, who are talking about covering preventative mental health services like counseling under MSP. That's the type of signature initiative that could really make a mark on a premiership, rather than just sort of, increasing funding to programs that it's not even clear if they're working right now.
Yeah, the Green criticism of the budget I thought was one of the best, where the leader, Sonia Furstenau, came out and said, you know what, this could have been David Eby's Dave Barrett moment from the 1970s. You come in, you make some big transformational change. Dave Barrett created ICBC. He created the Agricultural Land Reserve. He created the Human Rights Tribunal. And instead we got, a budget where the two biggest things, prescription contraceptions and the renter's rebate, were John Horgan promises from previous years, and then the addictions plan, for whatever reason, is less than the opposition addictions plan. And that boldness that we maybe expected from David Eby, the guy who said he was so keen and so riled up to be premier, he had to get in there as fast as he could without the leadership race, and then we got this. It doesn't match, I think, and that's sort of one of the questions. Jeff?
Suggestions like that would be a bit more credible if, on the other hand, the same leader weren't promising to give away healthcare money in a tax giveaway by axing parts of the employer health tax. So if that's going to be the suggestion, then at least be honest about the cost and where you're going to get the money for it, because giving away health money and promising more health service isn't consistent.
Okay. All right. We're going to stick around and have some more audio podcast discussion. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast in the audio format, you're watching us on YouTube or TV. Remember, there's often extended discussions. We get into some of the other issues. You want to subscribe to that. We will be back next week with all the latest in BC politics. Thank you to the panel for being here as always. And thank you for watching. And we'll be back next week on Political Capital.